When I looked back on it, I haven't watched it since we made it, it felt from another time. My history is the kind of the cliche Spielberg story that everybody hears about. My dad gave me a movie camera, a little 8mm movie camera as a kid, like, you photograph the family vacations, I don't want to do it anymore. And fell in love with it. The little apple dropped in my head. It's like, this is what I want to do. So I grew up in Minnesota and got all my friends to be involved in these little movies that we would do. And I would just do movie after movie after movie. And then ultimately we would, when I got into high school, I would rent the local high school theater, and I'd have like the annual film festival, and we'd sell out the crowds because I would have all my friends come in and they wanted to all see themselves. And then I would recruit the principal of the school, and I'd have him be in the movie, so he'd show up. So it was the ultimate scam, how to get out of schoolwork. After film school, I did a whole bunch of commercials, educational films, music videos, and it gave me a good idea of how to run a crew, how to make a movie under a budget, because they were all very inexpensive. How to sort of keep the whole machine moving, but always had my eye on doing a feature film. I had written a couple things at that point that I was trying to, like everybody, you're trying to get off the ground. I'd have writing partners and I'd write something. I had been trying to get a feature for so many years. It's like, yay, I got a feature. But then when you get it, you're like, what is it that I can do to bring anything fresh to this or something new? Or how can I just do the job well? Right? So I looked at the original Amityville. I don't know if I remember looking at the other ones, but I remember looking at the original Amityville and seeing what the tone was and all that. But then the script they handed me that Chris and Tony wrote was very different than the Amityville movie. It wasn't in a haunted house, but I was totally open to the idea that it was a fresh take on it, which was a pseudo family living in a loft. And that was a cool idea to have this kind of pseudo family, because what is this, the 7th Amityville by the time we did this? I always loved horror films, so I think I had already been preparing that for my whole life, so I'm a huge fan of The Exorcist and all these movies. And so the preparation for it was just how I can take that material and what is it that I can do physically with it that is unique and fresh and interesting.
There's one director I work with who did these cheesy, low-budget movies.
Wally was doing a whole bunch of movies at that point that were low-budget. He was still, 8 years away from doing Memento and then Batman, and then he won the Oscar, of course, for Inception. But at this point in his career, he was doing tons of low-budget films, and we started looking at reels, and I had a whole bunch of agents send me reels, and Wally's reel came around, and I said, boy, this guy can light, he's really good.
This is a very rare
Flair. This is a complete fake man. I've got to tell everybody.
I had prepared, how many years since film school to prepare for this, 4 or 5 years. And so I had this movie storyboarded like crazy. I had hundreds of storyboards of kind of every shot and how it would go together. So Wally's main job was to interpret that, how to make that physical, and then a lot of the lighting. And I think what he did lighting-wise is just beautiful. It's still, I don't know, several dozen movies later, for me, one of the best lit movies that I've worked on. He was great. So when it came to the effects, Christopher, the producer, and I talked about how should we do this? The mirror, all this kind of otherworldly stuff, how should we do it? CGI was kind of brand new at that point, so it was an option, but it's pretty crude. It was pretty crude, and it was kind of beyond our financial reach because it was a fairly low-budget movie. And so we thought, should we green screen things? Should we composite it? How should we do it? And we fell in love with this idea of, let's go old school, because the Amityville sort of franchise is kind of very in the 70s. It went, even in the 90s, it was old. And so we thought, let's see if we can maybe attack this with sort of an old school approach. So we started looking around, and we went to the original source, Bill Cruz, the guy that did the original Amityville. We approached him, we said, hey, we're doing a sequel. Do you want to try something and do sort of really cool retro old school effects and see how we can sort of master that, and might it give the film sort of a classic feel? And Bill said, sure, he was down for it. None of the shots in there are how you would expect to do it, where you have a mirror and then you put green on there and then you composite. Everything was done on set. And for better or for worse, it was done on set, because it was very time consuming to set up a mirror. The way it was done, basically, if there's a mirror here, you're shooting the mirror, but then we have a piece of glass in front of the lens, and it reflects from other angles. It's called a half-silvered mirror. And then if you wanted to have that orange glowy thing, that was a orange glowy thing to the right of the camera. And then if you wanted a face or a person, they'd be over there to the left of the camera. And it was this huge space that you needed where black velvet was hiding that guy, and that guy was being hidden over here. And sometimes we had 3 elements, and it took forever to set up. But it gives kind of organic, sort of analog feel to it that you just wouldn't get by sort of compositing in a computer or something. So it definitely ages the movie because it looks old school, but that was kind of our point. And Bill really liked it because he hadn't done anything so old school in a long time. The makeup effects of a company called Vision Technologies. I'm an old school makeup effects guy. Dick Smith was one of my heroes growing up. He's the guy that did The Exorcist. And so I thought, let's do some of the stuff like kind of old school, bladders and things like that. And it was really fun. And so Vision Technologies was up to the task. Again, we didn't have a lot of money, so you're asking them to do a lot of work. We didn't have much to give them or much time because there was a schedule that we had to deliver this in a certain amount of time because Republic Pictures wanted to have it out by, I think it was Halloween or something. And so we had to have it out pretty quickly. And so a lot of the things like when the guy gets cut in the face and blood comes out, those are old. Now you would just have a computer program, have the little blood squirt out digitally and stuff. We did it to where there was wires up the back of his head. And again, it looks really cool and organic, but what you see in those kind of shots is they're being extra still, so the effect works. And when you look at a lot of movies that have effects, bladders and stuff, even in The Godfather, they had a lot of like bullet holes where they had wires and all that stuff. And you see the people being sort of inexplicably still because they're getting shot by a Tommy gun, but they are having to not pull away all their wires and all that stuff. So it gave it kind of this old school sort of charm. This was the first time, since my first movie, this was the first time out of like a dozen or 15 movies, I just would do my own home movies. When you watch a movie, you can watch it over and over and over. You can watch it this year and 10 years later. When you make it, you're making it in a month. It's fairly fast.
Okay, are we rehearsing, guys?
Lock it up for rehearsal. We need 1 second, John, on the light.
And it kind of comes and goes. And I knew I wanted to sort of remember like all the nuances and all the people and, oh, what was that guy's name? And just to remember the experience of it from my perspective. So I took these home movies and then I'd shoot most of it, but I was busy doing other things, directing the movie. So then I would hand the camera to an actor or a crew member, say, you shoot some. And so pretty interesting behind the scenes of how we did some of the effects, what the actors were like off camera. And we had this great cast that we could sort of catch behind the scenes and get them sort of unplugged.
And blast it!
The memories were not to screw it up because it was my first Hollywood movie. And it's like, okay, don't screw this up. They gave me a chance. Don't screw it up. And so I think like a lot of young directors starting out, I was probably a bit too rigid, especially lower budget movies. You never have the time or the money or the resources, so you're having to kind of wing it and make the best thing you can within the confines of what you have. I storyboarded this thing like crazy. And so what you do when you do that is you then protect your storyboards. And I think now when I look back, I would maybe be a bit different, is you have to be more open to what's going on. Because you have all these creative, awesome people around, and they bring stuff to the table. They bring stuff to the scene, they have ideas, and when you're a young director kind of, holding on to this idea, you're not necessarily open to things. So when I look at that, I'm like, man, I was like, I think a little too closed off to sort of new thoughts and all that stuff. I look at the 90s horrible hair, which is like, oh my God. So that's what, mostly the hair. That's what I look at. I would say one of the things you need the most is whether or not you have the answer, always have an answer. Because everyone's looking to you for an answer. And so I remember it still happens. I remember when I go to bed at night after I've made it, on a day of the set, I just hear my name over and over and over again, because that's what you hear. Every department head, every person is like, that's what a general does in the Army, and that's what a director does in a film. They're looking to you to kind of keep the machine rolling. And So I'm always hearing, John, do we need this? John, do we need that? And it's just like this echoey thing that I was here. So you're getting questions 1,000 a day, and you better have answers for it. So what you need to do is you need to prepare, right? I think a lot of people, when they do their first film, aren't prepared, and they're completely bowled over by the physical challenges of making, the stamina of making a movie, and having all the right answers. Spielberg says it's all about the shoes. He said, if you're going to direct a movie, it starts with getting the right shoes. And what he's talking about is the physical ordeal of going through 16, 18-hour days, 6 days a week, no sleep, and not cracking, and have opinions. Barbra Streisand had a good quote when she directed her first film. She said, directing's a good job for people who have strong opinions. It doesn't help as part of the job of directing to go, I don't know, do you think we should go red or blue? I'm not sure, what do you think? What do you think? That's not part of the job. That's not how you're built. So the job is about having a strong opinion.
Everybody had dip down once.
The other thing is, if you're going to be a director, to be able to take all of this noise that I'm talking about, all of this stuff that's happening and catastrophe over here, and just before the camera rolls or when you're rehearsing with an actor, be able to kind of zen out and make all that go away. That's what actors do, right? They have to know their lines, and they're worried about paying the rent, and they're worried about this. But in the moment that they need to be there, the good ones are able to make all that go away and go and be this kind of focused person. And I think a director needs to do the same thing. You need to, and maybe I didn't have that totally back then, to be able to make all the noise go away and focus on what you're doing. What hit me watching it is how much the actors put their souls into it. I haven't seen it since we made it, and it's like they really put all their heart and soul into it, but they were the right actors who really bought the sense of actually sort of believing what they were doing. I would say enjoy the weirdness of it. It's a very weird movie. I'm a huge horror fan, and it doesn't really adhere to all of sort of the horror tropes. It's quite slow by today's standards. It took its time. The script took its time sort of getting to know people. The amount of time that we spent on character development is, I don't think you do that now in a low-budget horror film. And I think the strength of it is probably more of that than the sort of the genre pieces. But enjoy the sort of retro ride, because it's like something that wouldn't be made today.